On March 11, 2011, a big earthquake in Japan caused a very bad nuclear accident. It was one of the worst ever. After the nuclear plant had a terrible meltdown and blew up, lots of people had to leave their homes. Even now, the place where the plant is located is still not safe to live in. In this video, we'll look closer at what happened before the Fukushima nuclear disaster, what went wrong, and what people are doing today to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Japan's economic miracle. After World War II, Japan had a remarkable economic recovery. Despite the heavy damage the war caused, Japan's economy and population grew a lot in the next 20 years. As the country grew, it needed more power and electricity to support its development. In 1955, with some help from the United States, Japan passed a law called the Atomic Energy Basic Law. This law marked the beginning of Japan's use of nuclear power. One of the nuclear power plants built in the 1960s as part of Japan's nuclear energy effort is the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. It's in Okuma, a small coastal town. Fukushima Daiichi has 6 reactors and can generate a lot of power, making it the second most powerful nuclear facility in Japan after Kashiwazaki Kariwa, which is the world's largest. This plant provides electricity to many areas, including Miyagi, Tochigi, Ibaraki, and even Tokyo, the capital city. But Japan is in a region with lots of earthquakes and tsunamis because it's where 4 tectonic plates meet. So it's important to be cautious about safety. Chapter 1. The Tsunami. Japan is very careful about building things to withstand earthquakes. When they built the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the company in charge, Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, had to make sure it followed the latest safety rules and had the right equipment. The plant is on a small hill that used to be 35 meters above the sea to make sure it can handle earthquakes. They flattened the hill and made it 25 meters high. This way, the plant's foundation is on solid ground, not loose soil. At the time, TEPCO believed the plant was safe from tsunamis because they had built a 6-meter seawall to protect it. But just before the earthquake on March 11, 2011, TEPCO told Japan's Nuclear Safety Agency that the plant could be at risk from a big earthquake and tsunami, like the one in 1896. Then, on March 11, 2011, a massive earthquake hit. It was one of the most powerful and destructive earthquakes in Japan's history. Huge waves, as tall as a 12-story building, swept across the northern parts of the country, going as far as 10 kilometers inland. In just a few hours, more than 1 million buildings were destroyed or damaged, and over 20,000 people lost their lives. Many were left homeless. For the people living near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the worst part was yet to come. Chapter 2. The Nuclear Meltdown. Shortly after the ground started shaking at Fukushima Daiichi, reactors 1, 2, and 3 turned off automatically. Reactors 4, 5, and 6 were already being fixed and not working at that time. Luckily, Reactor 4 had its fuel rods removed and stored safely in a spent fuel pool, a pool with a special liquid to keep the rods cool and prevent them from reacting. But there was a problem. The earthquake cut off power to the plant, but they had backup generators to keep things cool in case of a power failure. These generators started working immediately. They were supposed to keep the reactors cool even without electricity. If they couldn't, there could be a big problem like a nuclear meltdown. Just 6 minutes after the earthquake, Reactor 1's emergency cooling system turned on because it sensed higher pressure inside the reactor. This system is supposed to release hot steam to prevent pressure from building up and causing an explosion. At 3:27 p.m., the first tsunami hit the seawall around the plant and didn't cause much damage. But a bit later, an emergency cooling system in Reactor 1 failed. Without it, the temperature inside Reactor 1 started rising dangerously. At 3:46 p.m., a massive tsunami, much taller than the seawall, flooded the plant. It submerged most of the backup generators, and with no power, the plant's safety systems stopped working. This was very bad. Temperatures inside the reactors started going up, and if they didn't fix this, a meltdown would happen. At 6:00 p.m., the water level in Reactor 1 got very low, exposing the fuel rods. Without enough water to cool them, the rods got hotter. An hour later, the Prime Minister declared a nuclear emergency. They said there was no radiation danger yet, and they were trying to fix the problem. But by then, the fuel rods in Reactor 1 were exposed to the air, and they started melting, causing a nuclear meltdown. At 9 p.m., they worried there might be a big explosion like Chernobyl, so they told people within 3 kilometers to leave. People within 10 kilometers were told to get ready to leave. The next day, at 5:30 a.m., they decided to release some radiation into the air from Reactor 1 to prevent an explosion. 20 minutes later, they got some power back and pumped water into Reactor 1 to cool it down, but the fuel rods had already melted. The steam inside the reactor mixed with the hot fuel and created hydrogen gas, which could explode. At 3:30 p.m., they expanded the evacuation zone to 10 kilometers. Then, just 6 minutes later, there was a huge explosion in Reactor 1, damaging the building, but not the reactor itself. 5 workers got hurt. Later, they expanded the evacuation zone to 20 kilometers. On March 13, at 2:42 a.m., Reactor 3's cooling system also failed and water levels started dropping. By March 14, at 11:01 a.m., there was another explosion in Reactor 3, causing the reactor building to collapse. 11 workers were hurt. They said no radioactive material got out. At 1:15 p.m., Reactor 2's cooling system failed and water levels started dropping too. By 8 p.m., the fuel rods in Reactor 2 were exposed to the air. A third meltdown was on the way. By 6 a.m. the next day, there was a third explosion that damaged Reactor 4's area. A fire broke out, releasing a lot of radiation. They kept pumping seawater into Reactors 1, 2, and 3 to cool them down. On March 17, they even used helicopters to drop seawater onto Reactor 3. While they were trying to fix Fukushima Daiichi, Japan was also dealing with the earthquake and tsunami aftermath. Many roads and bridges were destroyed, making rescue and relief efforts tough. Finally, on March 20, 9 days after the earthquake, they brought in new generators for Reactors 5 and 6, and they cooled down. Chapter 3. The Aftermath. On the same day, they finally got the power back on in Reactors 1 and 2. But even though this was good news, the damage to the land and water had already happened. During the problem, the reactors released a lot of radioactive stuff like iodine-131, caesium-134, and caesium-137 into the air. Also, it came out later in 2013 that radioactive water had been leaking into the Pacific Ocean since the accident. Sometimes, they found traces of this radioactive stuff in tap water and food. A report from the World Health Organization, WHO, in 2013 said that some people living near Fukushima had a higher chance of getting thyroid cancer compared to those in other areas. Even today, there's a big area around Fukushima Daiichi, about 200 square kilometers, where people can't go because there's too much radiation. Fukushima Today. Now, 12 years after the accident, there's still a lot of work happening to clean up and reduce the radioactive stuff at Fukushima Daiichi. It's estimated that it will take 30 or 40 more years and cost a lot of money, maybe tens of billions of dollars, to finish taking apart the plant. One big job is getting the old nuclear fuel out of the reactor cores. By 2021, they had removed all the old fuel from Reactors 3 and 4. They plan to start taking out the fuel from Reactors 2 and 1 in 2023 and 2027. Reactors 5 and 6 didn't get much damage, and they were turned off in 2011. After the accident, they put in systems to clean up the radioactive water at the site, but there's been too much of it, and they ran out of space to keep it. So in April 2021, the Japanese government said it was okay for them to slowly release the water into the Pacific Ocean over 30 years. Some people are worried about how this might affect the ocean and the local fishing industry. The Fukushima disaster taught important safety lessons for nuclear power around the world. Now, many nuclear reactors have emergency systems that don't need electricity, extra batteries in case the power goes out, and stronger backup generator rooms. What do you think about how Japan handled the Fukushima disaster? Do you think they could have done better? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching Top Futuristic. Don't forget to subscribe the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.